Today, Iran is the world's only major theocracy. The so-called Islamic Republic is ran on Shia Muslim principles, and the state's most powerful figure is a Muslim cleric, currently the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But until 1979, Iran was a secular monarchy under a ruler called the Shah. So then, what made his political system fail, and why did the people of Iran replace monarchy with religious rule? What was it that caused the Iranian Revolution? Well, Iran actually experienced three different revolutions over the course of its tumultuous 20th century, the first two set the stage for the infamous events of 1979. Before that revolution, Iran, known outside of the country as Persia, had been at the center of a succession of empires going back for some 3,000 years. A variety of different imperial dynasties ruled over Iran during that time, though the most important ones, when looking at the modern state, were the Safavids, who brought Shia Islam to Persia, as well as the Qajars, and the final Iranian dynasty, the Pahlavi. Iranians had been Muslim in one way or another for centuries before the Safavids, but Islam has a number of different subdenominations, the largest of which, by far, is Sunni Islam, which the Safavids largely wiped out in Iran. In a distant second place is their favored Shi'ism. To oversimplify considerably, the main dispute between the Sunni and the Shia surrounds the right to lead the Islamic community, with the Shia believing that the grandson of Islam's Prophet Muhammad, Hussein ibn Ali, was wrongly denied that leadership and that only his descendants have the legitimacy to lead the faith. Though the first Safavid Shah was mostly interested in Shi'ism because his rivals, the neighboring Ottoman Empire, were Sunni. That choice saw Persia become one of the few Islamic countries with a Shia majority. And it stayed that way under the Qajar dynasty, which ruled for a long time and did a lot of things, but importantly for our purposes, it stuck to autocracy until the early 20th century, and it allowed Persia to come under the influence of foreign, non-Muslim powers, which, not surprisingly, made both secular and religious Iranians quite unhappy. And that brings us to the first of our three Iranian revolutions, the Constitutional Revolution of 1905. So, the most important consequence of the Constitutional Revolution was the creation of the Majlis, or an elected Persian parliament, which actually still exists under the Islamic Republic today. The second most important consequence was that the revolution was messy. No one liked autocracy, but different liberal, conservative, secular, and religious factions of revolutionaries wanted very different futures for Persia. That's going to be a common theme, by the way. The new Majlis was divided and thus weak, so Muhammad Ali Shah, the second to last Qajar Shah, struck back with the help of Russia. That made the Qajars even more unpopular. For the next decade and a half, Persia was in a near constant state of chaos. It didn't help that the British and Russian empires had formally split Persia into spheres of influence in 1907, only for World War I to break out less than a decade later. The Persian theatre saw Russians and Brits face off against the Ottomans in northern Persia, despite the fact that the Qajar state was officially neutral. Famine and disease, partly caused and partly exacerbated by the war, killed at least a quarter of the Persian population. The Constitutional Revolution, on the whole then, failed. It flirted with democracy, but didn't fundamentally change the system that governed Iran. However, it did discredit the Qajar dynasty completely, and in 1921 a prominent officer in the imperial army, Reza Khan, carried out a coup against them. The Majlis would make him the new Shah as Reza Shah Pahlavi in 1925. In spite of the fact that he was formally installed by an elected body, Reza Shah was very much an autocrat, in part because Shia clerics saw democracy or republicanism as a threat to religiosity. However, their insistence on keeping power in a Shah's hand ultimately was not one that served their interests. Reza Shah set out to modernize his country, including by enhancing education, building rail transport, developing Iran's oil reserves, and removing aristocratic elements from Persia's bureaucracy and military. Obviously, his support for meritocracy didn't extend to his position as Shah. In regards to religion, Reza Shah saw Shi'ism and Islam generally as foreign concepts, and emphasized Persia's pre-Islamic history as a key part of Iranian identity. Following in that vein, he officially changed the country's English name from the exonym Persia to the traditional Iran. Reza Shah failed to solve the problem of foreign influence in Iran, though, and in 1941, fearing that he might give Germany access to Iran's newly exploited oil reserves, Britain and the Soviet Union — Russia had gone through its own revolution — invaded. Reza Shah was deposed in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, often referred to as just the Shah, as he was the last one. Mohammad Reza was much more willing than Reza Shah to support the westernization of his country. Notably, he helped Britain and the United States carry out a coup against his own government in 1953, after that government, led by a prominent Republican, Mohammad Mossadegh, had coerced him into taking control of Iran's oil industry from the British. Okay, so because of Western help, the Shah was now effectively in total control of Iran, and with that power, he began our second Iranian revolution, the White Revolution. It kicked off in 1963, and it lasted until the Shah's overthrow in 1979. The revolution consisted of 19 reforms that struck at the very heart of Iranian society and the economy. The Shah essentially took his father's modernization efforts and ramped them up to 11. Among other things, the White Revolution saw millions of peasant families become property owners as the state purchased land from feudal landlords and redistributed it to them. Literacy and health services were built in the countryside, and secular education was mandated for all children. Iran's cities were revitalized with the building of new infrastructure, as well as libraries, parks, and schools, and women's rights were enshrined in law, including the right to vote. Although, to be fair, that right was more symbolic than anything else, given that the Shah was unelected, he did what he wanted, and the Majlis had no real power to stop him. His secret police, the Savak, enforced his will across Iran, and anyone who spoke up against the Shah was not in for a good time. In the early years of the White Revolution, his power was absolute. The Shah's reforms caused his economy to boom, the material benefits of which placated much of his secular opposition and created a new middle class. That being said, it was also very much the case that a lot of Iran's new wealth ended up in the pocket of the Shah personally, as well as the Western oil companies whose governments backed him. However, as the 1960s became the 70s, Iran's economy, and subsequently Mohammad Reza Shah's appeal, began to take a turn for the worse. And while many Iranians were unhappy with their government, one man quite literally became the face of opposition to the Shah, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. While wealth may have temporarily pacified some reformists, it did not appeal to the Shia clergy, who, not wrongly, believed that the Shah wanted them sidelined. Khomeini was a politically minded, respected clergyman who was exiled from Iran after inspiring failed protests against the reforms of the White Revolution. In neighboring Iraq, he developed a system of government called the guardianship of the jurist, under which secular governments would be wiped away, and experienced clergy, which funnily enough included himself, would rule on earth until a descendant of Shi'ism's Hussein ibn Ali revealed himself. It should be noted, though, that while Khomeini's views were to become popular in Iran, not all Shiites, including not all Iranian Shiites, believed that separation of church and state is incompatible with Islam. That being said, despite him being outside the country, Khomeini's ideas began to gain significant traction amongst Iranians, and that, combined with Pahlavi Iran's economic downturn, as it would happen, basically relying on a bunch of oil money isn't the best way to run an economy, saw the country's political stability start to crumble. In response, the Shah, under US pressure, decided to back down, as little as he possibly could. What's important is that a previously outlawed democracy-supporting organization, the Freedom Movement of Iran, was allowed to reorganize. By late 1978, then, the seeds of our third and final revolution, the Islamic Revolution of 1979, were sown. It's commonly referred to as just the Iranian Revolution. The economically repressed youth of Iran, Democrats, and the Shia community rallying around Khomeini were now ready to openly oppose the Shah. In August, public protests against the operations of the Savak broke out, and the Shah declared martial law. So, in September, more protests erupted in the capital against, well, martial law. The protesters called for the end of the monarchy and the return of Khomeini to Iran. By then, he was operating out of France and had become an internationally noteworthy figure. The revolutionaries clashed, often violently, with the Iranian army, which was actually a fairly well-equipped and trained force due to Western aid. The United States, in particular, had no wish to see an Islamic government take over Iran, and while it did occasionally criticize his tactics, the US most definitely was on the Shah's side. The same could not be said about the army that it helped build, parts of which abandoned the Shah and joined the revolutionaries in December. Without them, Mohammad Reza Shah, in the face of near-universal public opposition, realized quite rightly that his time was up, and he fled the country for Egypt, never to return. Ayatollah Khomeini arrived triumphant in Iran on February 1st, 1979. But his job was not quite done. The Shah was gone, but Iran adopting the guardianship of the jurist as its new political system was far from a certainty. Most Iranians did, at least nominally, want an Islamic republic, but whether or not they understood and wanted what Khomeini was offering, and what Iran ultimately got, remains a matter of scholarly debate. It was a secular provisional government that initially replaced the Shah, one led by a Democrat and a member of the freedom movement of Iran, Mehdi Bazargan. But Khomeini, by using his widespread support with the population, was able to pressure Bazargan's government into doing basically whatever he wanted. So Iran's new constitution would include an elected president and a prime minister, not dissimilar to Western democracies like Germany, France, or Italy. But it would also have another position, one that would be held for life by Khomeini. He became the first supreme leader of Iran, the paramount religious, social, and political authority in the country. New supreme leaders were to be chosen by a so-called assembly of experts made up of Shia clerics. While the Majlis would remain, and even be given more power than it had under the Shah, a new Guardian Council, half of the members of which are directly appointed by the supreme leader, was given power to oversee and veto legislation. Over the course of the 20th century, the Iranian people demonstrated themselves to be quite unwilling to put up with oppression. They've now been trialing their Islamic Republic for over 40 years. Whether they will allow it to persist into the decades to come remains to be seen. While Iran's monarchy was toppled, another Middle Eastern state, Saudi Arabia, retains a powerful one to this day. To find out how that happened, you can check out the video to the left. If you enjoyed this one though, don't forget to subscribe for more, and as always, I've been James, and thank you for watching Look Back History.